Welcome to Stagecoach, where you'll find the best Western books on the market and the men and women who write them. This podcast is brought to you by Dusty Saddles Publishing, home of the best-selling authors in the Western genre. This is your host, Ginger Winters. Join us as we continue the story of Lady Law by Ken Farmer.
Chapter 3. Dodge City, Kansas. The boiler of the big black 3x2 locomotive blew off pressure, releasing a huge cloud of steam that billowed out more than 20 feet with a loud hissing sound. White smoke rose out of the straight smokestack of the idle train as some passengers disembarked and still others boarded at the station. Bill looked out his window as the steam rapidly dissipated. He folded the newspaper he had picked up in Wichita and placed it on his seat. Fiona and he got to their feet and made their way down the narrow aisleway to the rear door of the passenger car. The headline of a 3-inch column story on the back page he had not gotten to read was, "Rash of Savage Killings in Southern Chickasaw Nation. Light Horse Baffled." They stepped down the steel stairs to the red brick platform and glanced around. "Well, changed some?"
"Been here before, I take it,"
said Fiona. "About 10 years ago, when I had wandering feet. It was called Hell on the Plains back then."
"Got over that, did you?"
Bill grinned. "Almost. Guess we'll go down and get the boys and see if we can buy a pack mule somewhere. I don't relish trying to carry our luggage with us, plus trail supplies."
"How long do you think it'll take to get to Garden City?"
2 days, give or take, assuming that we don't get caught by a storm."
"Storm? What kind of storm?"
"Well, it is fall, so could get a blue norther at any time. Thunderstorm or even a twister."
"Twister? Oh, my God. This is Tornado Alley, isn't it?"
"Well, yeah, but flat as this country is, you can see it coming from a long way off." Fiona furrowed her brow.
"Even at night?"
Bill shook his head. "Well, no. But if you hear a sound like a freight train bearing down on us in the dark, dig a hole."
"Everything looks so flat between here and Wichita."
Pretty much the same between here and Garden City, too. This is the Great Prairie, and back in the day, millions upon millions of bison wandered about and grazed the grass. Actually, the town was originally called Buffalo City, but there was already a town by that name, so they changed it to Dodge City after the fort."
"Just as well. I understand the white man almost managed to kill off the buffalo to extinction."
Bill grimaced sadly. What with the buffalo hunters and the orders from General Sherman to slaughter all the buffalo to drive the Indians to reservations, it didn't take too long. By '76, most of the animals were gone. The prairie was littered with bones and skulls.
"That is such a pity. The way the white man came in here, eliminated the natives' food source, and then stole their land. It was no wonder they went on the warpath. They had to."
They stopped at the livestock car as the hostlers were placing the cleated ramp at the sliding boxcar door. The yardmaster led Fiona's Appaloosa Diablo out first, and then Tippy, Robert's Chocolate Morgan. Bill handed him a couple of Liberty silver dollars. They tightened up their cinches and swung into the saddle. "There a livery around here close part?" Bill asked the yardmaster. He pointed. "Yeah. Just head on north there on Central Avenue to Front Street, turn left, and you'll find Barker's Livery and Wagon Yard about half a block past the Long Branch Saloon. Where she used to be." "What happened?" "I burnt down in '85. Given that there was another couple of dozen saloons, they just never rebuilt her. There's the Prairie Hen Saloon right across the street if you need to wet your whistle, but you'll have to check your guns, though." He glanced at the ivory-handled coat under Fiona's unbuttoned morning coat.
"Not in this lifetime,"
she muttered. They clucked their horses into a jog trot.
"The legendary Long Branch Saloon, huh?"
Rowdy a place as you'll ever see, back in the day. Of course, things have tamed down a bit.
Noticed that back in Wichita.
I know what you're thinking, Marshal Miller. And no, we're not going into the Prairie Hen. Need to keep our presence in this part of the world a little quiet, right? Sure as I'm breathing, you'll get into a hoorah with some cowboy.
Me?
You? She smiled.
Well, as a student of history, I've come to realize that human nature hasn't changed much over the millennia, but we do always seem to get better weapons.
Point made. They dismounted in front of Barker's livery, a grizzled old-timer in blue bib overalls with a huge chaw in his cheek stepped out of the office, setting his battered old fedora on his head. He spat a stream of amber juice off to the side and mumbled, "Howdy. Name's Thaddeus Barker. What's for you today?" "I need to stall water and give a bait of grain to the boys here for a couple hours, check the feet, and give 'em a good brushing, too," said Bill. "Sure. $1 apiece." He spat again. Yeah, we're looking to buy a pack mule." Funny you should ask. Just taken in one last week. Actually, the feller didn't say nothing about him being a pack mule. He come in a-riding on him. But I expect he'd carry a painty or two. First paint mule I ever seen."
His dam must have been a paint,
said Fiona. "His dam what?"
No, I mean his mother. How much?
"Oh, should have said so. $20'll do."
Tack go with that?
He spat into the dirt street again. You can have what he come in with. Just a saddle and a bridle." "I'll be fine," said Bill.
We have some shopping to do. Where's the closest mercantile?
asked Fiona. He pointed in a westerly direction. "A little over a block that way. Bertram's." Bill touched the brim of his dark gray Homburg. "Much obliged. We be back in a bit." They opened the double 9-foot doors to Bertram's Mercantile and looked around. They instantly were hit with the enticing aroma of fresh ground coffee. "Well, this place is bigger than May's in Ardmore," said Bill. Fiona glanced at the clothing section.
Why don't you get our trail supplies? Shouldn't take too much for 2 days. I'll be over here. I've got an idea.
Due to the unpredictable weather, always better to double up on the food when on the trail.
Speaking from experience?
Actually, yes. He grinned and watched her stroll over to the clothing tables and racks. Bill approached the 20-year-old fresh-faced clerk behind the main counter. "Welcome to Bertram's. How can I help you today? My name's Cletus Bertram." Roberts pinched his brow. You the owner?" The young man grinned. "Oh, no, sir. That'd be my daddy. He's making sure I learn the business from the ground or floor up, so to speak. I'm just one of the hired hands." "Nothing wrong with apprentice work." "No, sir. Now, what can I help you with?" "Going to be on the trail for a couple of days. Need about 6 cans of beans, 2 pounds of slab bacon, 5 pounds of arbuckle, 4 pounds of jerky, 4 cans of peaches, and 5 pounds each of flour and cornmeal. Oh, and a pound of salt." Cletus looked up from his notepad. "Need any utensils?" "Oh, gracious. Glad you said something. Almost forgot. Let me have a coffee pot, 2 plates and cups, graniteware. Couple of knives and forks, a 6-inch skillet, a quart pot, box of strike anywhere matches, 2 canteens, and 2 full bedrolls, including ground tarp." The clerk finished his list. Be a few moments, sir." "I'll be fine. I'll be over there with that tall lady browsing through the clothing."
"Wife?"
Bill glanced over his shoulder as he walked away. No. He worked his way through the tables stacked with bolt after bolt of material until he reached the ready-to-wear. "Find what you're looking for?" Fiona turned at the sound of his voice and held up a black suit, white shirt with a celluloid collar, black vest, and a black string tie.
"Your Baptist preacher's outfit."
"My what?"
"I thought we'd go in undercover as a Baptist preacher and his schoolmarm wife. And don't get any ideas."
"Excuse me?"
Oh, don't have a hissy fit with a tail on it. I'm just kidding. When I answered Mr. Masterson—"
"Just call him Bat. He's used to it."
"Right. Anyway, I told him to find a boarding house or something on the outskirts of town. He said he would reserve a room at the same place where he and his wife Emma are staying."
"And you were going to tell me when?"
"What time is it?"
He reached into his vest pocket, pulled his watch halfway out, and stopped. "You do that to me all the time." She flashed a big smile at him.
"I know, but you love it, or you wouldn't keep falling for it."
"I didn't know he was married."
"He married an actress and singer, Emma Moulton. He met her when he managed and then purchased the Palace Variety Theater in Denver back in '88. He's traveling around the Midwest promoting fisticuffs and writing a weekly sports column for George's Weekly. That's a Denver newspaper."
"Bat Masterson writing for a newspaper?"
"Apparently he has an eye to the future."
Bill nodded. "Interesting. Might ought to get us some warm coats. Better to have 'em and not need 'em than need 'em and not have 'em." She nodded.
Paraphrase from 2 Peter 2:21.
"One day I'm going to come up with a quote that you won't have a clue from whence it came."
"I believe Omar Khayyam said that."
She grinned.
"I'll get us some coats, too."
Bill and Fiona walked into the big double doors of Barker's livery. Each carried a large flour sack tied at the throat and their bedrolls under their arms. The proprietor walked up from back in the barn. "Well, see you folks bought out Bertram's. Got your horses all took care of. The Palouse needed his left front replaced, so I done 'em all 4. Keeps his seat balanced that way, you see." Fiona set her bag down.
"I really appreciate that. How much for the shoeing? Not good getting on the trail."
"Yes'm, my thoughts too. Just $1. Morgan's was fine." "Much obliged. You mind if we use a couple of those empty stalls to change clothes in?" asked Bill. "Help yourself." "I appreciate it if you'd saddle up that mule while we're changing. I'll loop these flour sacks and hang 'em on each side of the saddle horn." The old man nodded. "Ought to work fine."
"He got a name?"
Fiona inquired. "A feller brung him in just called him Spot."
"That'll do, I suppose,"
she replied. They took their carpet bags into the interior of the livery. She entered the last vacant stall on the right. Roberts took the second from the last on the left. Fiona set her bag on the oat straw-littered floor and began disrobing, folding her travel clothes and placing them on top of the stall door. She took out her white union suit, donned it, and then the rest of her trail duds. Her black wool split skirt with a single-piece doeskin insert in the seat and inner thigh hung down over her pantaloons and tall, scalloped black boots. Fiona pulled her white blouse over her head and slipped her black wool vest on. She buckled her concho-lined black cross-draw holsters with her matched Colt 38-40 peacemakers about her shapely hips. Finally, she slipped on the long, dark brown oil canvas coat that served as a top coat as well as a rain slicker. She might be dressed as a man, except for the ankle-length split skirt, but there was no question she was a woman. Fiona grabbed her folded clothes from the top of the door and turned to lay them in her carpet bag. She opened the top to place her morning coat inside and jumped back.
"Goodness!"
2 blue eyes peeked out of the top of the bag, blinked, and a soft meow came out of the mouth of a half-grown solid gray cat.
"Well, and just who are you?"
She squatted down and reached out to pet the kitten on top of its head with her index finger. The cat rubbed its muzzle and the sides of its lips against her hand and commenced purring. It reached up and grabbed her hand with both paws in a hug and continued nuzzling it.
"My, but you're a real lover, aren't you? That's the loudest purr I've ever heard. And what are you doing in my bag?"
As if in answer, it jumped out of the carpet bag up to her right shoulder and butted Fiona's cheek with the top of its head.
"Oh, my!"
she exclaimed as her eyes began to tear up.
"You are so sweet. What am I going to do with you?"
She put all of her clothes in the bag, closed the flap, and snapped the catch.
"All right. I see I don't have much of a choice."
Heading out into the aisleway, she joined Bill and Thaddeus at the front. The cat was still sitting on her shoulder. See you found the damn cat, or rather he found you. Been trying to get rid of that pesky critter for a couple of weeks now. Carried it a couple of miles out of town. Be damned if it didn't beat me back here." The cat butted Fiona's cheek again. Barker was holding the mule by a braided cotton rope. "'Pears as though he's taking a shine to you. He don't do nothing but scratch or try to bite me. Was fixin' to take him out back and shoot him. Hate cats."
"You'll do no such thing."
Her steel-gray eyes flashed. The hostler took a step back from her. "Well, don't have to get hostile, lady. You take him then, along with this here mule."
"All right, I will. Does he have a name?"
She took the lead rope. "No, just call him damn cat." She glanced at the affectionate gray creature sitting comfortably, purring and making mash on her shoulder.
"Think I'll call you Smoky. How's that?"
He promptly butted her cheek again. Spot stepped forward and extended his muzzle to the cat. Smoky responded in a like manner. They touched noses. "Oh, yeah, mule and the cat seem to be attached. Reckon that's why he wouldn't stay gone. Now I'm rid of both headaches. Makes it a good day." He spat a long stream of the amber juice off to the side and wiped his chin with the sleeve of his shirt. Fiona grinned and set Smoky on Spot's saddle just behind the two tied-together flour sacks. She turned, stabbed her foot in the flat-bottomed copper-lined stirrup, and easily swung up onto Diablo's back. She looked at Bill.
"You coming, or you going to take a nap?"
He shook his head and grinned. "Just waiting to see if you were through adopting." She nodded at him, dallied the mule's rope around her saddle horn, and trotted off. Smoky seemed to be quite at home, sitting in the middle of Spot's saddle. "Got a damn menagerie," Bill mumbled as he followed behind. "Hey, look there. Danged if Spot don't have an amble gait. He's smooth as a baby's butt." Fiona glanced behind her.
"It appears you're right. Smoky likes it,"
she commented as the cat promptly laid down on the smooth, moving mule. Kansas Plains. A little over a mile out of Dodge City, Fiona turned to Bill, riding alongside her and Spot.
"Got a trail picked out?"
He nodded. "We'll just follow along the Arkansas River. Runs just south of both Dodge and Garden City."
"Well, that makes it easy."
"And gives us good water source and wood for a campfire, not to say anything about shelter, should we need it."
"You keep mentioning that."
Just speaking from experience. Just speaking from experience, ma'am. Fiona." She cut her eyes at him.
"Uh-huh."
Gainesville, Texas. Cal Mankiller dismounted at the front of Smith Brothers' wagon yard and corral. A red-headed teenager stepped out of the aisleway of the large barn with a 4-tined pitchfork in his hand. He removed his short-billed green and gray baseball cap. "How do? What can I— Oh, say, I remember you. Fed and watered your horse a month or so back. Different horse, though. Back in town, are you?" The Cherokee nodded. Me know you now. Dark then. Not see spots on face." "Yeah," he grinned. "My pa said that when I was little, I walked up behind the milk cow while she was eating bran, and she farted on me. Get it?" He rubbed his hand over his freckled face. "You know, she sprayed spots all over my— well, never mind." Mankiller's expression never changed. His cold black eyes appeared to burn a hole through the young man. Well, how can I help you?" Looking for a woman marshal named Miller." "A lady marshal? Oh, sure. That'd be Marshal Fiona Miller. Woo-wee! Fine figure of a woman. I mean to tell you. Fine figure of a woman. Was undercover here for a while, trying to catch a killer, paper said. Knows how to ride a horse, too. How's come you looking for her?" His eyes locked on the teenager again. "Where's she?" Even in the cool of the fall afternoon, the young man broke into a sweat. Well, don't rightly know, excepting she has a room over to Skeen's boarding house on Dixon Street. Where Dixon Street? No read. Oh, well, sure. Just a minute. I'll go inside and draw you a map. Ain't too far. He turned and went back inside the barn, happy for a moment at least to be out of the intimidating presence of the big scar-faced man. Less than 3 minutes later, he came out with a lined sheet of paper he had torn out of a Big Chief tablet and handed it to the Indian. Can you make it out? Mankiller glanced at it, and then to his right down the street, and then nodded. Me water horse. Well, there's a trough right over yonder against the corral. He pointed to his left, turned, and headed back into the barn, mumbling under his breath. Not so much as a thankee or a much obliged. Mankiller led the blood bay gelding over to the half-full wooden water trough. The grateful horse immersed his muzzle and began to suck up the cool water while the Indian studied the map. Kansas Plains. Fiona and Bill trotted along the north banks of the Arkansas, tilting their heads forward to shade their eyes from the setting sun, already casting long shadows through the scattered trees. Smoky got to his feet in the middle of Spot's saddle, stretched, and then jumped down to the sandy ground. He loped off to a nearby clump of buffalo grass, scratched himself a shallow hole, and did his business. After quickly covering the spot with sand, he ran after the mule, still maintaining his amble trot, jumped in the air, grabbed the flour sack hanging from the horn on his side, and clawed his way back to the seat, and calmly took his position again. I expect we should find a place to camp for the night, don't you? Asked Bill.
Sounds good. I believe Smoky had a good idea just then. I need to visit the bushes, too.
Well, now that you mention it, uh-oh.
What?
Look to your right. Fiona looked off to the north and saw a dark purple, almost black line of clouds just beginning to show above the horizon.
Oh, my.
Well, that wall's coming pretty fast. See that copse of cottonwoods up ahead near the bank? Fiona replied.
I do. Should be a good place between the trees on the north and the river.
They broke into an easy lope and pulled rein just inside the trees. If you'll water the horses, I think I see an ideal camp spot. I'll gather some wood for a fire. There was a 5-foot bank of sand where the trees stopped, and then a level sandy area 45 feet wide down to the slow-moving river that had its headwaters in Colorado. We can set up below that bank, give us good protection from the north wind, if that's all there is.
What do you mean?
Asked Fiona. Well, if it's cold with sleet or snow, that's one thing. Just have to hunker down, but if it's a rain, that's something else altogether.
How so?
He looked back to the north at the ever-growing dark line. Rain in this country can cause a flash flood in a hurry. We'd have to move above the high water mark.
Oh, I see your point. Glad you're more familiar with this country than I.
Being familiar only means you learn to be ready for most anything. The black cloud was getting closer faster, rolling and churning. The wall was still 5 or 10 miles away when they were hit with a cold outflow, dropping the temperature rapidly.
Oh, goodness. It's like someone left the gate down between here and the North Pole.
Fiona pulled her oilskin long coat tighter about her as she led the animals down to the river. When she got back to the campsite, Bill had the fire started and was feeding it some larger limbs he had gathered from the various piles of deadfall lying around from the last flood. Let's jerk their gear and hobble 'em up in those trees. Be good shelter, and they'll have some graze in the winter cheatgrass.
Right.
Fiona lifted Smoky from his place in the middle of Spot's saddle, opened her carpet bag, and set him inside, and closed the flap before she started pulling the tack. He promptly curled up and went to sleep.
I'll take them up to the trees. I have a little business to take care of.
What makes you think I don't, too?
It's a lot easier for you than for me. You can just traipse down to the water's edge and take care of it. I'll bring some more deadwood for the fire.
Was hoping somebody would. He glanced up at the darkening skies that were beginning to get a tinge of green as the temperature continued to fall. Think we're going to need it. Best dig out those winter coats we bought, too. He pulled his road jacket tighter and flipped up the collar. Fiona had a good fire going, banked against the shelf of sand, protecting it from the whistling, bitter north wind when Bill walked back up. Damnation, that wind cuts right through you like a knife. He reached down and picked up the sheepskin jacket and dark green wool neck scarf she had laid on his saddle. He slipped it over his black broadcloth coat. Feels like temperatures dropped 30 degrees or so.
I expect that's close enough for government work. Coffee'll be ready in just a bit. I'll slice some bacon and fix it with the beans. We can share a can of peaches, too.
I didn't realize how hungry I'd gotten. A few hard sleet pebbles mixed with raindrops bounced off the brim of his hat. He glanced up at the boiling greenish-purple clouds almost on top of them. Uh-oh. She looked up from stirring the beans in the small skillet.
What?
Gonna be sleet and ice instead of snow.
That's better than rain, don't you think?
Yes, but we're gonna need more shelter. He pulled his bowie knife from his belt and stepped over to the vertical river bank next to the fire and started digging into the sand. Gonna carve us a small cave that'll help. We'll just have to be careful and not dig too deep or it'll cave in on top of us.
You're just full of all sorts of joyful facts, aren't you?
She held up her hand.
I know. Experience.
He glanced over his shoulder at her. Hey, you're getting good.
Not really.
Bill looked at her again. How so?
Born that way. By the way, you don't see any of those twisters coming, do you?
He took a peek over the lip of the bank and above the trees at the clouds and the rapidly failing light. I don't see a wall cloud. That's usually the first sign.
Usually?
The sleet and freezing rain got heavier. Fiona looked over at the horses and Spot in the trees. They had already turned their butts to the wind.
You think the boys will be all right?
I expect. There's a right smart of trees and brush between them and the open ground to the north.
Coffee's ready.
He dragged the last bit of loose sand from the shallow hole on the side of the shelf, brushed his hands off, and slipped his knife back in its sheath. Well, that should do it. Now to wrap my hands around a hot cup of coffee. They're already stiff from the cold.
Why didn't you put on your gloves?
I got in such a hurry to carve us a shelter, I forgot. He took the blue speckled granite-ware cup from her.
Then quit whining.
He sniffed of the hot, aromatic, stout trail brew. Now that I got some coffee, I'm good to go. A wave of sleet dropped from the clouds, peppering the entire area. Some of the frozen raindrops caught the outer edge of the campfire and sizzled. Glad our fire's up against the shelf. Should keep it going most of the night. I'll carve another small cave for the extra firewood to keep it dry. She took a sip of her own coffee.
All the comforts of home.
He grinned. Well, I wouldn't say that, but like Big Casino used to say, any port in a storm. They eased over into their shelter, which was just tall enough to sit up in, and nursed their coffee as the sleet and freezing rain pelted down with a fury. Smoky was contentedly curled up in Fiona's lap. Their sugans were already spread out underneath the overhang and behind them. They had finished their filling but meager supper of bacon, beans with hot water cornbread, and a dessert of sliced canned pickled peaches. Smoky was fastidiously washing his face and paws after sharing their supper. Tomorrow would be another day. Chapter 4 Skeen's Boarding House, Gainesville, Texas. The dark man-shaped figure in the shadow of the big red oak across the street from the boarding house hadn't moved in over 3 hours, until now. He turned his head at the sound of a horse and wagon coming up the street. The only light, save the gibbous moon, was a lantern Fay Skeens had left burning on the porch. A green and yellow buckboard pulled by a sorrel mare drew to a stop in front of the Victorian 2-story house. A man stepped down and tied the lead to the ring on the iron post in the front. He walked around to the other side and helped a woman to the ground. She held a bundle in each arm. "Well, that was some game with Munster, wasn't it?" asked Bodie.
For the life of me, I just don't understand it. Makes no sense that 20 men...
22. Annabelle frowned at him and then continued.
22 men keep running into each other, trying to put that little old funny-shaped ball over each other's property line.
Goal line?
Goal line, then. I just don't get the point.
Well, that is the point, dear. Who can put the ball over the other feller's goal the most times in 2 hours is a winner.
Of what? The game. The game of what?
He shook his head. They call it football.
But they carry it up and down the field. The only time they touch it with their feet was when one of them kicked it after his group carried it across the other group's property line.
Go.
I know. And then I thought the man was mad at the ball because he dropped it in the dirt and then kicked it through those sticks poked in the ground.
That team got 2 points for that added to the 4 points that they got for carrying it across the line, giving them a total of 6 points. And that's how Gainesville won. Don't you see?
No.
Annabelle still seemed confused.
And did you see those 3 men that carried off the pasture on stretchers? They were out cold. The whole thing is just incomprehensible to me.
They call it a field.
Well, then they should have cleaned off the cow pies before they started.
She giggled.
That one, the chubby one, fell face first into a fresh pile. Took him forever to get the green fecal matter out of his eyes, bless his heart.
Yeah, well, gotta admit, now that was funny. Go ahead and take little Bass and Cassie Ann inside, and I'll start unloading the groceries, said Bodie. Annabelle pecked his cheek.
I'll tell Fay that we're back. I'm sure she'll be tickled to come out and help,
she said in her deep Alabama drawl. That'll be fine. Looks like we bought out the store. Gonna take at least 4 or 5 trips.
Well, bless your heart, honey. You know Fay doesn't like to shop more than once or twice a month. That's the way she plans her meals. I swear to goodness, I don't think I've ever seen a more organized woman.
She's a good person for anyone to pattern themselves after. Her cerulean eyes snapped.
You watch yourself, Mr. Hickman. I'll put a knot on your head Billy Sunday can't remove in a month.
He grinned at his petite, blonde-headed wife. Yes'm, I know you would. The ebony eyes from across the street dispassionately watched the woman climb the steps to the porch and tap the bottom of the gingerbread screen door with the toe of her shoe. He saw an older woman with dark blonde hair open the front door and then the screen door.
Oh, Annabelle, here, let me take one of those sweet babies. I've got them, Fay, but Bodie could use some help with the groceries. Oh, my goodness,
she said as she hurried down the red brick walkway to meet him halfway with the first box.
Here, I'll take that.
She looked up at the dark moonlit sky, and then to the north.
Norther coming. I feel a change in the air.
Bodie sniffed. Do believe you're right, Fay. I'll make sure we have plenty of firewood inside. He glanced off to the north also. I bet it gets here before midnight. The big Cherokee across the street watched the exchange with interest and nodded. Kansas Plains.
You watch those hands, mister.
Fiona elbowed Bill in the ribs. Ow, not my hands. She sat up in her bedroll and whacked him behind the head.
Not your hands? That only leaves... Ooh, men!
She set Smoky on top of her blanket, grabbed her tall scallop-top boots, and slipped them on.
It's a good thing my pistols were under the ground tarp.
She rolled out of the tiny cave into the sleet and ice-covered ground.
Goodness gracious!
she exclaimed as her foot broke through the crystalline crust.
"We must have gotten 6 inches or more. I'll stoke up the fire and put on some coffee, unless you're going to sleep in."
"I'm getting up. Smokey's lying on my chest, purring and eating bread."
"He just wants to be fed."
"Now that sounds almost as good as a hot cup of coffee." Fiona glanced up at the clear, star-studded sky, just beginning to gray in the east.
"Well, at least the storm has pushed on to the south."
She brushed away most of the sand they had placed on top of the pile of coals, added some peeled bark from a piece of cottonwood deadfall, and blew on it until it burst into a bright yellow flame.
"Glad we put that wood in the other hole you dug out, or we wouldn't have a fire, coffee, or anything."
"I've been here before."
"Here?"
"I mean this situation."
"What was her name?"
"No, that's not what I meant. I meant to say— Oh, never mind." He sat up, forcing Smokey off his chest, and pulled his own boots over his socks and tucked his pant legs in the top. The cat padded over to Fiona and started weaving between her legs, rubbing on her ankles and purring.
"All right, I'll fix you something in a minute."
As if on cue, the feline turned, bounded up the 5-foot-high bank, and disappeared into the trees.
"I think somebody held it as long as they could, or else he wanted to go see his buddy. You could go slip the nose bags on the boys and give them a bait of grain while I start breakfast, if you're not too busy."
"Yes, Your Majesty. Right away, Your Majesty." He grinned and threw a chunk of sleet crust at her, hitting her in the back.
"That gate swings both ways, Marshal Roberts, and don't forget, never mess with the cook."
Fiona slipped on her sheepskin and gloves. She grabbed a few branches, broke them up, and placed them in a teepee-like fashion over the tiny flames. In a short time, she had a good cooking fire going and set the coffee pot on a flat river rock close to the heat and sliced the bacon to put in the skillet. In a few minutes, Bill came back down into camp. We've got a problem."
"Besides being cold as a well-digger's derriere?"
Somebody stole our horses during the storm." She raised up from where she was squatting by the fire, tending the sizzling bacon.
"What?"
"Someone slipped in after the first wave of sleet and ice, cut the hobbles, and made off with them." He held up the pieces of severed latigo. "Look to be 3, maybe 4.
"What about Spot?"
He grinned and shook his head. "Not him. Judging from the torn-up ground in his area, he wasn't having any of it. Apparently they wisely left him alone."
"Did you see Smokey anywhere? He headed up that way before you left."
"Oh, yeah. He's sitting on Spot's back, cleaning his paws." Fiona dished up some of the bacon, stuck it inside a water biscuit she had made last night, and grabbed her scarf. She picked up Spot's saddle, bridle, and blanket, along with her Winchester from under the tarp covering the tack, and headed to the trees. "Where are you going?"
"After the horse thieves, of course."
"By yourself?" She stopped, turned back to him, and smiled.
"We can't both go. I've seen this ploy before. Some of the thieves steal the horses, and when the owners go off looking for them, their pals slip back around and raid the camp. Does that answer your final question?"
"Well, I'll just have some breakfast then."
"Good idea. They shouldn't be hard to track. I doubt they considered Spot was rideable. Probably thought he was just a pack mule. I'll be back soon."
"I'm sure you will." He stomped through the frozen crust over to the fire to the right of their little cave, grabbed his cup, filled it, and squatted down. "God help those stupid bastards," he mumbled. Fiona pulled the empty feed bag from Spot's nose and picked Smokey up from his back.
"Don't suppose you'd go back down to the camp?"
He gently rubbed the cold tip of her nose with his paw.
"Didn't think so."
She fed him some of the bacon from her biscuit, stuffed him inside her sheepskin jacket, and rubbed the mule down vigorously with his wool blanket, talking to him all the while. After making sure all the sleet and ice were removed and his muscles and circulation were stimulated, she folded the blanket with the dry side down and placed it on his back. Lifting the double-rigged Texas A-fork saddle, she set it just back of the high withers and pulled a bubble in the blanket underneath the gullet. After taking the slack out of the latigo, she walked him around in a large circle for a moment to get the hump out of his back, cleaned the ice from his hooves, tightened his cinch again, and swung easily into the high-cantle saddle.
"All right, let's go. Got to teach some malefactors a lesson."
She squeezed Spot up into his smooth amble, and they trotted along, following the tracks to the west.
"Yep, 4. 2 leading the boys and the other 2 in the front."
After a little over a mile, she pulled the paint mule to a halt.
"What's this?"
Fiona noticed one of the lead tracks had peeled off to the north. She could clearly see the tracks in the bright white crusty sleet making a big curve back to the east across the flat prairie.
"Exactly what I thought. Going back to harvest what he can from our camp. Hope Bill is alert."
She reined Spot away from the trail toward the river on her left and eased down the embankment to ride along the edge of the water. Fiona patted him on the neck.
"I'm betting that they expect to be followed by somebody on foot. No need to ride out in the open. That's almost as dumb as riding along the top of a ridge line or a switchback in our country. But you wouldn't know that."
Spot flicked his long ears back at her.
"Or then again, maybe you would."
She looked forward about 400 yards where the Arkansas River meandered to the south and then back west, and saw a thin plume of smoke rising straight up into the still sub-freezing air on the other side of a clump of willows just around the bend.
Well, didn't think they'd go too far at night in a storm."
Her breath created a fog in the zero cold. She slowly rode closer to the spiraling tendril of campfire smoke, keeping to the cover of the trees and brush that lined much of the bank of the river. Fiona dismounted at 50 yards out, checked the loads in her Colts, and added a 6th round. She took hold of Spot's lead rope and moved quietly toward the camp, keeping well behind the available cover. Being down below the floodline embankment, they were able to stay on sandy river wash. She looped Spot's lead around the saddle horn with his reins and stepped out from behind the thick clump of junipers.
"Good morning, gentlemen. Coffee smells good."
The 3 men gathered around the washtub-sized fire, all with cups in their hands, spun around at the sound of Fiona's voice. "Who the hell are you?" asked the burly man with a full beard.
"Could ask you the same thing."
A younger, thinner, but obviously closely related man pitched what remained of the thick black brew on the ground and set his cup on a flat river rock next to a battered tin coffee pot. His close-set dark eyes squinted into the morning sun behind her back. "Why, we're the Zillin brothers. Just bone pickers, lady. Gathering up buffler skulls and sich. Like some coffee? Believe we got some left." He grinned, showing 3 tobacco-stained teeth, and shifted his tan canvas coat away from the 6-shooter on his left hip.
"Don't think so. Besides, you've made several mistakes."
"Oh, and that'd be what?" asked the oldest of the 3.
"1, you make terrible coffee, judging by the amount of grounds that you just dumped on the sand. 2, you'll never get to that pistol in time. 3, that chocolate Morgan up there by your wagon is a friend of mine's, and that Palouse next to him belongs to me."
"Why, we found them horses last night, lady. Must have got loose in the storm." The big bearded one glanced at his brothers. "Ain't that right, boys?" They nodded in agreement. Fiona grinned.
"Well, it's kind of hard for a horse to cut his own hobbles. They don't have thumbs, you see. You know, next to a horse thief, I hate a liar worse than anything. To quote Shakespeare, 'Thou lie out on't, sir, therefore 'tis not yours. For my part, I do not lie in it, yet it is mine.'" The skinny brother snapped back. "What? Who the hell is this here Shakespeare feller? Sounded like something from the Bible.
You ain't a-calling us liars, air ye? The eldest opened his coat also.
Oh, I actually thought it was fairly obvious, but let's just say your eyes and mouth don't match.
The beady-eyed youngest Zellen glared at her.
You must not be very bright, lady. We're 3 guns against 1.
The other 2 started easing to the side, spreading out trying to get an angle on her and get the sun out of their eyes.
Mayhaps we'll have a little fun with you, 'fore we plant your ass in the ground.
The thin one said, and then cackled. I get first dibs, little brother. She is a mite pert, even if a little skinny, said a voice from her far right as the 4th brother stepped out of the brush. Sorry I wasn't here to welcome you into our camp. I was, erecting a monument up on the bank in the trees. Her left hand eased up and undid the loops holding the deer antler buttons, allowing her coat to fall open. Smoky leapt from his place inside to the ground and darted between the legs of the skinny one as Fiona's peacemakers appeared in her hands faster than the eye could follow. She fired simultaneously in 2 different directions. The eldest, nearest the edge of the river, took a round in the middle of his chest, knocking him into the shallows on his back. The bearded brother to her near right caught another at the base of his throat. He collapsed like a wet paper sack, his life's blood spurting out from the wound and staining the sand around his head as he gurgled his last breath. A piercing squeal made the 4th man on the far right turn to his left as Spot charged from behind the cedars, his ears laid back and teeth bared. The largest of the brothers almost had his gun out of its holster when the mule spun around and launched both back feet. One caught him in the upper chest like a trip hammer and the other foot under his chin with a sickening snap. The blows knocked him tumbling backward in the air over 10 feet with a crushed face and a broken neck. His body came to rest like a rag doll against the base of a 6-inch thick willow. He was dead before he hit the ground. The skinny one in the middle nearest the fire threw up his hands.
I give, for God's sakes, I give,
he screamed and then dropped to his knees. Fiona stepped forward, holstering her left-hand Colt as Smoky padded back from the other side of the man after taking care of his business. He jumped up, grabbed the bottom of her coat, climbed to her shoulder, and promptly butted her cheek.
Don't know if you did that on purpose or just needed to relieve yourself, but whatever. Thank you for the distraction. I'm sorry we stole your horses, lady, honest Injun. The one we used to pull our wagon just he laid down and died on us. We thought you was just pilgrims. Well, you thought wrong. And besides, that's no excuse for stealing. Who was the one that peeled off back there? That was our pa. He figured he'd see if and then you had anything at your camp if he tried to tail us.
A shot echoed from back down the river.
Sounds like he figured wrong, too. How do you know? I'd say that was a .41 caliber. Ever hear of William H. Bonney, better known as Billy the Kid? Well, sure. He got himself killed 15 years or so ago.
She grinned and arched a well-shaped dark eyebrow.
Did he?
The young man's eyes grew big as saucers before he finally asked,
"Oh, what are you going to do with me?" Nothing. I think by the time you get the rest of your family buried, you'll have learned a good lesson,
she admonished. The surviving member of the Zellen clan shook his head.
It was all that damn painted-up mule's fault. Wouldn't let nobody near him. Told Pa he was trouble.
Fiona nodded.
Mules are very intelligent and have an excellent memory. He recognized your brother's voice, and retribution was his. Now gather up all of your weapons and throw them into the river. Oh, now.
Her steel-gray eyes hardened into flint.
You can go for a swim and find them after we're gone. That's assuming you don't freeze to death.
She turned around, stepped over to Spot, and swung easily into the saddle.
Just a word to the wise. Don't ever let me see you again.
She watched him throw the last of the Zellen's guns out into the slow-moving Arkansas before she and Spot rode off back down river toward their camp, leading Tippy and Diablo behind. Fiona dismounted in the area up in the trees where they had hobbled the animals last night and loosened Spot's cinch.
You can come out now,
she said while she was tying the horses to saplings. Bill stepped out from a thick copse of cedars off to the east. How many?
4.
Really? I only heard what sounded like your 38-40s once. Maybe going off at the same time. She nodded.
Spot took out one of them while I shot 2 at the same time. Left the youngest to do the burying and the reading. You got the patriarch of the clan, I take it?
I tried to make him see reason, but we weren't connecting. He committed suicide.
Tried to draw, huh?
Uh-huh. Made some more coffee. What say we have a cup and load up and head west?
Sounds good. Think we'll make Garden City by sundown?
Well, we should. Is Bat aware?
No.
Bill grinned. Well, this is going to be interesting. Skeen's boarding house, Gainesville, Texas. The Cherokee pulled his gray woolen blanket tighter about him as he lay underneath a thick wisteria bush. The sleet was still lightly peppering down. No one leave house until storm over. Mankiller wait. He crawled backward out of his hiding place, got to his feet on the opposite side, and shook the ice pellets from his blanket. Without a backward glance, he skulked away in the general direction of the downtown area, only 2 blocks away, in search of a secluded restaurant. Fulton's boarding house, Garden City, Kansas. Fiona and Bill left their horses and Spot tied to the iron ring set in the cut limestone curbing in front of the 2-story Queen Anne house. They climbed the steps to the front porch, and Bill twisted the brass knob, ringing the doorbell. A large matronly woman with her mouse-brown hair up in a bun opened the front door.
May I help you? I'm Ma Fulton.
Yes, ma'am. We'd like to see Mr. Masterson, said Bill. She pushed the green gingerbread door open and stepped back.
Do come right in. He and Emma are in the parlor. We were just having some hot cocoa by the fire. Would you like some? That sounds wonderful. We're almost frozen stiff,
commented Fiona. They stomped the ice from their feet on the welcome mat and followed her inside.
Some folks to see you, Bat.
A dapper, dark-haired, mustachioed man, just beginning to show a thickening around the middle, got to his feet from a burgundy wing-back chair near the roaring fireplace. How can I be of service? Fiona held out her hand.
I'm Marshal F.M. Miller, and this is Marshal Brushy Bill Roberts. Please call me Fiona.
The 40-year-old former gunfighter seemed to be taken aback, but only for a moment. You're... well... I was expecting...
A man, I know,
she interrupted. She gets that a lot, commented Bill with a smile.
I find being a woman is occasionally beneficial in our line of work. The rapscallions and miscreants we have to deal with never expect it, and if they do, they underestimate me.
Masterson's dark eyebrows went up. I can vouch for that, and believe me, she has Bass Reeves' respect and mine. Bat's sky-blue eyes flashed. You know Bass Reeves? Fiona nodded.
Quite well. We worked together down in Texas and the Nations when we took care of the Tom Story gang. Bass's regular partner, Jack McGann, was laid up with a broken leg. Judge Parker assigned me to Bass. I think he had the same reaction when the judge introduced us.
His eyebrows went up again. Now I am impressed. There's no finer lawman anywhere than Bass Reeves, and trust me, I know more than my share. I couldn't hold his hat, and neither could Wyatt Earp for that matter. She nodded and smiled.
He is definitely one of a kind. Just the bare mention of his name in the nations could cause many an outlaw to get religion. It was truly an education and a privilege to work with him.
I'd love to meet him one day.
It could happen,
Fiona commented. Ma Fulton interrupted the conversation.
I am so sorry. Where are my manners? Let me take your coats, and then I'll get you some hot cocoa. Goodness me.
She stepped forward. We need to see to our animals first, Miss Fulton, said Bill.
Oh, Shaw. Call me Ma. Everyone does.
Bat set his cup on the mantel. I'll grab my coat and show them the carriage house, Ma. We'll be back soon as we feed and water the horses.
And our mule. He's been a real hero so far,
commented Fiona.
As well as Smoky.
Smoky? Bat questioned. She unbuttoned her sheepskin, and the gray feline jumped to the floor and went immediately to Ma's feet, where she stood over near the fireplace and began his weaving pattern, accompanied by his extraordinarily loud purr. Well, I certainly look forward to hearing that story. Oh, and I'm afraid my manners are also lacking. This is my sweet bride, Emma, said Masterson as he grabbed his long gray top coat and black bowler from the hall tree.
So happy to meet you. I, too, look forward to some of your stories,
said the attractive auburn-haired woman. Ma Fulton bent down, picked Smoky up, and cradled him in her arms.
I'll bet you'd like some warm milk, wouldn't you?
He butted her chin. 30 minutes later, the trio came back into the house through the back door, carrying Fiona and Bill's bags.
Just set your things in the hallway for now. I'm sure you'd like to warm yourselves by the fire and partake of my special hot chocolate. We've already had supper, but I'll fix you all some pancakes and sausage in a little bit, just the thing for a cold winter's evening. Sounds wonderful, Ma.
Fiona glanced over to see Smoky curled up on an oblong rag rug next to the wood-burning cook stove in the kitchen. Ma Fulton smiled.
He downed his milk and a little dab of leftover roast beef from lunch, and promptly went to sleep there.
She waited until they hung their winter coats and hats on a tree in the hallway, and then handed each of them a white ceramic mug. The steam rose from the hot cocoa as they turned to walk into the parlor. Bat noticed Fiona's ivory-handled peacemakers under the flap of her mid-thigh black wool coat. Nice. May I see one? She pulled her left-hand pistol from its holster, flipped it around, and offered it to him butt first. You right or left-handed? She smiled.
Yes, I am.
Bat nodded.
It's another thing Bass and I have in common. We're both ambidextrous.
It was Masterson's turn to smile. I've heard that Bass Reeves doesn't miss. Nor does Fiona, with either hand. Bill had a wry grin.
It's not so much that he doesn't miss. It's just that the concept of fear never enters his mind, regardless of the odds,
she said. That often means more than speed and accuracy. Bat shucked the 5 rounds from the Colt and held them in his left hand while he spun the pistol on his finger, stopped it, cocked the hammer, and squeezed the trigger in one smooth motion. Great balance, smooth, feather trigger, nice, very nice. Both the same? She nodded.
I call them Romulus and Remus.
Ah, the twin brothers legend said founded Rome.
My mother was born in Rome.
He reloaded the 5 rounds, duplicated her original move, and handed the pistol back. She smoothly spun it, flipped it back into its cross-draw holster, and winked at Masterson.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Stagecoach, brought to you by Dusty Saddles Publishing, the home of Western excellence, where the best of the Western authors can be found. Visit our website at dspublishingnetwork.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue with the adventures of Fiona Mae Miller in Lady Law by Ken Farmer.